The rain tapped softly against the window of Eleanor's small apartment, a steady rhythm that matched the ache in her chest. At 68, she had grown accustomed to solitude. But today, the weight of it pressed harder than usual. Her hands, weathered by years of work and love, trembled as she held the cream-colored envelope. Its elegant script bore her name, but she hadn't opened it. She didn't need to. The return address, her sister Margaret's sprawling estate, told her everything. Eleanor set the envelope on the kitchen table, next to a chipped teacup and a half-eaten slice of toast. The apartment was modest, filled with relics of a life once vibrant, a faded quilt her mother had sewn, a shelf of books she'd read a dozen times, and a single photograph framed in tarnished silver. In it, she and Margaret stood side by side, young and radiant, their arms linked under a summer sky. That was decades ago, before time and choices carved a chasm between them. She hadn't spoken to Margaret in years, not since their last argument over their parents' estate. It wasn't about money. Eleanor never cared for that. It was about fairness, about the way Margaret always seemed to claim the spotlight, leaving Eleanor in the shadows. Now, this envelope sat like a silent accusation, proof that Margaret's life had moved on without her. Eleanor's thoughts drifted to Daniel, her ex-fiancé, the man who had once promised her forever, only to walk away when she needed him most. She hadn't thought of him in years, but the rumors had reached her through old friends. Daniel was engaged to Margaret's daughter, Clara. And now, this invitation likely to their wedding felt like a cruel twist of fate. She poured herself another cup of tea, the steam curling upward like a memory. Daniel had been her world once. They'd met in their 30s, both teachers at a small community college. He was charming, with a laugh that could light up a room, and she'd fallen hard. They'd planned a life together, even picked out a little house with a garden for her roses. But when Eleanor's mother fell ill, she'd left her job to care for her, and Daniel grew distant. "I can't do this," he'd said one night, his voice cold. "I need someone who's here, not tied to a sickbed." He left, and Eleanor buried her pain in duty, nursing her mother until the end. Now, decades later, Daniel was back in her life, not as hers, but as Clara's. The thought stung, but what hurt more was the exclusion. Margaret hadn't called to invite her personally. No one had. The envelope was a formality, a nod to obligation, not family. Eleanor wondered if Clara even knew the history, or if Margaret had erased her from their story entirely. She stood and walked to the window, watching the rain blur the world outside. The street below was quiet, save for a young couple hurrying under an umbrella. Eleanor envied their closeness, their shared laughter. She'd had that once, or thought she had. Now, she was alone, and the invitation on the table felt like a door she wasn't sure she wanted to open. But something stirred in her, a flicker of defiance. She'd spent too long letting others write her story. Margaret, Daniel, even Clara, they didn't get to decide her worth. Eleanor turned back to the table, her jaw set. She wouldn't let this wound fester in silence. She'd go to that wedding, invited or not, and face the family that had pushed her away. Not for revenge, but for herself. For the woman she'd been, and the one she still could be. The rain fell harder now, a storm brewing outside and within her. Eleanor picked up the envelope, her fingers steady this time. She tore it open, revealing the elegant card inside. The wedding was in 2 weeks, at Margaret's estate. No personal note, no warmth, just the details of a celebration she wasn't truly part of. She set the card down and made a decision. She'd show up, not as the forgotten sister, but as Eleanor, whole, unbroken, and ready to reclaim her place. She spent the rest of the day preparing, She pulled her old sewing machine from the closet, determined to make a dress that would carry her dignity. The fabric was a deep emerald, a color that reminded her of the garden she and Daniel had dreamed of. As she cut and stitched, memories flooded back, good ones, painful ones, all part of the tapestry of her life. She wouldn't let them define her, but she wouldn't erase them either. By evening, the dress was taking shape, and so was her resolve. Eleanor looked at the photograph on her shelf, at the young woman she'd been. "You're still here," she whispered to herself. "And you're enough." The rain had stopped, leaving a quiet world behind. Eleanor sat at her table, the invitation beside her, and began to plan her journey. She didn't know what awaited her at the wedding: reconciliation, confrontation, or simply closure. But for the first time in years, she felt alive, ready to face the past and step into whatever came next. Eleanor's bus rumbled along the winding country road, the hum of the engine a steady companion to her racing thoughts. She'd chosen the bus over driving, not trusting her old car or her nerves for the 3-hour journey to Margaret's estate. The emerald dress lay carefully folded in her suitcase, a talisman of her courage. Outside, the landscape blurred into fields of green and gold. But Eleanor's mind was elsewhere, tangled in memories of a life she'd tried to leave behind. She hadn't seen Margaret's estate in over a decade, not since their mother's funeral. The house was a sprawling Victorian, inherited from their parents, with ivy-clad walls and a garden that bloomed like a painting. Growing up, Eleanor had loved it, but Margaret had claimed it as her own after their parents passed. "It's too much for you to manage," Margaret had said, her tone dripping with condescension. Eleanor had let it go, too tired to fight. Now, the thought of returning felt like stepping into a battlefield. Her fingers traced the edge of the invitation in her pocket. She'd read it a dozen times, memorizing the date, the time, the formal language that felt so unlike the sister she'd once known. Margaret had always been the golden child, charismatic, ambitious, the one who married well and built a life of elegance. Eleanor, quieter and more reserved, had been content in her shadow, until that shadow grew too dark to bear. She thought of Clara, Margaret's daughter, now in her 30s and radiant. No doubt, in her wedding gown. Eleanor had only met her a few times, back when Clara was a child with pigtails and a shy smile. Did Clara know about her? Did she know that Eleanor had once loved the man she was about to marry? The questions gnawed at her, but there were no answers here, only the road stretching ahead. The bus stopped at a small town, and Eleanor stepped off to stretch her legs. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. She bought a coffee from a roadside diner, the kind of place she and Daniel used to stop at on their weekend drives. He'd always order pie, teasing her for sticking to tea. "Live a little, Elle," he'd say, his eyes crinkling with warmth. She pushed the memory away, but it lingered like a bruise. Back on the bus, she pulled out a notebook and began to write. Not a letter, not yet, just thoughts, fragments of the hurt and hope she carried. "I'm not here to ruin anything," she wrote. "I just want to be seen." The words felt raw, but true. She wasn't going to the wedding to cause a scene. She wanted closure, maybe even forgiveness, not just from Margaret, but from herself. As the bus neared the estate, Eleanor's heart pounded. She imagined the guests, Margaret's friends, polished and poised, Clara, glowing with love, and Daniel, older now, but still with that charm that had once captivated her. Would he recognize her? Would he care? She straightened in her seat, smoothing her gray hair. She wasn't the young woman he'd left, but she was stronger, forged by years of resilience. The estate came into view, its grandeur unchanged, The iron gate stood open, welcoming guests in sleek cars. Eleanor's bus stopped a half-mile away, and she walked the rest, her suitcase bumping along the gravel path. The weight of it grounded her, a reminder of why she'd come. She wasn't an intruder. She was family, whether they acknowledged it or not. At the gate, a young man in a suit checked her invitation. His smile faltered when he saw her name. "I'll need to confirm with Mrs. Hargrove," he said, referring to Margaret. Eleanor nodded, expecting this. She stood tall, her emerald dress catching the late afternoon light. Let them whisper. Let them stare. She was here. Minutes later, Margaret appeared, her silver hair swept into an elegant updo, her dress a vision of cream silk. She looked every bit the matriarch, but her eyes widened at the sight of Eleanor. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice low but sharp. "I was invited," Eleanor said, holding up the card. "Or was that a mistake?" Margaret's lips tightened. "This isn't the time, Eleanor. This is Clara's day." "And I'm her aunt," Eleanor replied, her voice steady. "I have a right to be here." For a moment, they stood frozen, two sisters bound by blood and broken by time. Then Margaret sighed, a sound heavy with resignation. "Fine. But don't make a scene." Eleanor nodded, her heart racing. She stepped past the gate, into the world she'd been excluded from. The garden was alive with laughter and music, guests mingling under twinkling lights. She felt like a ghost, unseen yet present, carrying the weight of a past no one else seemed to remember. She found a quiet corner and watched, her eyes scanning for Clara. When she saw her, radiant in white, laughing with friends, Eleanor's breath caught. Clara looked so much like Margaret, but there was a softness there, a warmth that reminded her of their mother. And then she saw Daniel, older, grayer, but unmistakably him. He stood beside Clara, his arm around her, and Eleanor's heart twisted. She didn't approach them. Not yet. She needed time to gather herself, to remember why she'd come. This wasn't about Daniel or Margaret. It was about her, about reclaiming the pieces of herself she'd lost. As the music swelled and the evening deepened, Eleanor felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to heal. The wedding was a spectacle, every detail meticulously crafted. White roses spilled over trellises, their petals catching the golden glow of lanterns strung across the garden. Guests in tailored suits and flowing dresses moved like figures in a painting, their laughter blending with the soft strains of a string quartet. Eleanor stood on the edges, her emerald dress a quiet contrast to the extravagance. She felt out of place, yet rooted, her presence a silent rebellion against years of exclusion. She sipped a glass of sparkling water, her eyes drawn to Clara. The bride was a vision, her gown shimmering as she danced with Daniel. He looked at her with a tenderness that stabbed at Eleanor's heart. She remembered that look, the way it had once been hers. But she pushed the thought away. She wasn't here to reclaim him. She was here to reclaim herself. Margaret was everywhere, playing the perfect hostess. She glided through the crowd, her smile polished but distant. Eleanor watched her, wondering when they'd become strangers. They'd been close once, sharing secrets and dreams in the attic of their childhood home. But life had pulled them apart, Margaret toward wealth and status, Eleanor toward quieter, harder paths. The rift had started small, a misunderstanding here, a slight there, until it grew into a silence neither knew how to break. Eleanor moved through the garden, keeping to the shadows. She overheard snippets of conversation, gossip about Clara's dress, praise for Margaret's planning, speculation about Daniel's past. No one mentioned her, It was as if she'd never existed in their world. The realization stung, but it also fueled her. She wasn't invisible. Not anymore. She found a bench under a willow tree and sat, the cool evening air soothing her nerves. The invitation had been a formality. She knew that now. Margaret hadn't expected her to come. Maybe she'd hoped Eleanor would stay away, sparing them all the discomfort of her presence. But Eleanor wasn't here to make things easy. She was here to be seen, to remind them that she was still part of this family, whether they liked it or not. A young woman approached, her face familiar yet strange. It was Clara's cousin, Lily, Margaret's niece from her husband's side. Lily was in her 20s, with bright eyes and a hesitant smile. "You're Aunt Eleanor, aren't you?" she asked, sitting beside her. Eleanor nodded, surprised. "You know me. Clara mentioned you once," Lily said. "She said you were kind, but distant. I didn't know you'd be here." "Neither did they," Eleanor said, her voice dry. She studied Lily, searching for judgment, but found only curiosity. "They should have invited you properly," Lily said softly. "Family's supposed to stick together." Eleanor's throat tightened. "Sometimes family forgets." Lily nodded, as if she understood more than her years suggested. They sat in companionable silence, watching the party unfold. For the first time that evening, Eleanor felt a flicker of connection, a reminder that not everyone saw her as an outsider. Then Clara's laughter rang out, drawing Eleanor's gaze. The bride was standing with Daniel, their heads bent close as they shared a private joke. Eleanor's heart ached, not for what she'd lost with Daniel, but for what she'd never had with Clara. She'd missed so much birthdays, graduations, moments that could have bound them. Margaret had made sure of that. Lily touched her arm. "You should talk to her. Clara. I mean, she's not like Aunt Margaret." Eleanor hesitated. "What if she doesn't want me here?" "Then that's her loss," Lily said firmly. "But I think she'd want to know you." The words settled over Eleanor like a warm blanket. She stood, smoothing her dress, and took a step toward the crowd. But before she could move further, Margaret appeared, her face a mask of controlled displeasure. "Eleanor, we need to talk," she said, her voice low. "Privately." Eleanor followed her to a quiet corner of the garden, away from the guests. Margaret's eyes were cold, her posture rigid. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "This is Clara's day. You're making everyone uncomfortable." "Everyone," Eleanor countered. "Or just you?" Margaret flinched. "You haven't been part of our lives for years. You can't just show up and expect to fit in." "I didn't choose to be excluded," Eleanor said, her voice steady but laced with pain. "You pushed me out, Margaret. You and your perfect life. But I'm still your sister. I'm still Clara's aunt." Margaret's face softened for a moment, then hardened again. "This isn't the time. Please, just leave." Eleanor held her gaze, her heart pounding. "No. I'm staying. For Clara. For me." Margaret stared at her, then turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the stone path. Eleanor stood alone, her resolve unshaken. She wasn't here to fight, but she wouldn't run either. The night was young, and so was her courage. She turned back to the party, ready to face whatever came next. The music shifted, a slow waltz filling the air as couples took to the dance floor. Eleanor watched from her corner, her heart a tangle of emotions. Clara and Daniel were at the center, their movements graceful, their smiles radiant. The sight was a knife to her chest, but she refused to look away. She'd come too far to hide now. Lily's words echoed in her mind. She'd want to know you. Eleanor wasn't sure if that was true, but she needed to find out. She smoothed her dress, took a deep breath, and stepped into the crowd. The guests parted slightly, their eyes flickering with curiosity. She felt their stares but kept her focus on Clara. As the song ended, Clara stepped away from Daniel, her cheeks flushed with joy. Eleanor seized the moment, approaching before her courage faltered. "Clara," she said softly, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. Clara turned, her smile fading into surprise. "Aunt Eleanor?" she asked, her voice uncertain. I didn't know you were coming." "I wasn't sure I was welcome," Eleanor admitted, her eyes searching Clara's. Up close, she saw traces of their mother in her niece's face, the same gentle curve of her jaw, the same warmth in her eyes. It gave her hope. Clara's expression softened. "Mom didn't say you'd be here. I'm glad you came." The words were a balm, soothing the raw edges of Eleanor's heart. "I wouldn't miss your day," she said. "You look beautiful." Clara smiled, a genuine warmth breaking through. "Thank you. I wish we'd had more time together. Growing up, I mean." Eleanor nodded, her throat tight. "Me too. But I'm here now." Before Clara could respond, Daniel approached, his arms slipping around her waist. His eyes met Eleanor's, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. He was older, his hair streaked with gray, but the spark in his eyes was the same. "Eleanor," he said, his voice careful. "It's been a long time." "Yes," she replied, her tone even. "Congratulations, Daniel." He nodded, his expression unreadable. "Thank you. I didn't expect to see you here." "Neither did I," she said, a faint smile touching her lips. She turned back to Clara. "Can we talk? Just for a moment?" Clara glanced at Daniel, then nodded. "Of course." They stepped away from the crowd, finding a quiet spot near the rose garden. The air was thick with the scent of blooms, and the lanterns cast a soft glow over them. Eleanor took a breath, choosing her words carefully. "I don't want to disrupt your day, Clara, but I need you to know that I've always cared about you. I wasn't around because, well, things got complicated with your mom and me. But that was never about you." Clara's eyes softened. "I know Mom can be intense. I wish I'd reached out to you myself. I just didn't know how." Eleanor reached out, touching Clara's arm. "You're not to blame. I just want you to know you have an aunt who's proud of you. And I'm here, if you ever want to talk." Clara's eyes glistened. "Thank you, Aunt Eleanor. That means a lot." They stood in silence, the weight of years easing slightly. Then Clara hugged her, a quick, fierce embrace that caught Eleanor off guard. "I'm glad you're here," Clara whispered. "Really?" Eleanor's heart swelled, but the moment was cut short by Margaret's voice. "Clara, the photographer needs you." Her tone was sharp, her eyes fixed on Eleanor. Clara pulled back, giving Eleanor an apologetic smile. "I'll find you later. Okay." Eleanor nodded, watching her go. Margaret lingered, her expression a storm of emotions. "You're stirring things up," she said quietly. "This isn't your place." "It's my family too," Eleanor replied, her voice firm. "You don't get to decide where I belong." Margaret's jaw tightened, but she said nothing, turning to follow Clara. Eleanor stood alone, her heart racing. She'd faced Clara, faced Daniel, and now Margaret. Each step felt like a victory, small but significant. As the night wore on, Eleanor stayed, mingling with guests who didn't know her story. She danced with an older gentleman who complimented her dress, laughed with Lily over a shared glass of wine, and watched Clara glow with happiness. But the weight of Margaret's disapproval lingered, a shadow over her resolve. When the toasts began, Eleanor braced herself. Daniel stood, his voice carrying over the crowd as he spoke of love and second chances. His words were meant for Clara, but they cut through Eleanor like glass. She'd been his first chance, and he'd walked away. Yet here she was, standing tall, refusing to be erased. As the evening drew to a close, Eleanor knew she'd made her mark. She hadn't come to reclaim the past, but to rewrite her place in the present. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, she felt ready to walk it. The wedding wound down, the crowd thinning as guests drifted toward their cars. The lanterns still glowed, casting long shadows across the garden. Eleanor sat on a stone bench, her hands folded in her lap, the emerald dress slightly creased from the evening's events. She felt both heavy and light, as if she'd shed a burden but carried a new one in its place. Clara had promised to find her later, but the bride was caught up in farewells and photographs. Eleanor didn't mind. Their brief conversation had been enough a crack in the wall that had separated them for so long. She watched Clara from a distance, her laughter mingling with the night air. Daniel was beside her, his arm around her shoulders, and Eleanor felt a pang of something she couldn't name. Not jealousy, not anymore, just a quiet ache for what might have been. She was about to leave when Lily appeared, her face bright with determination. "You're not going yet, are you?" she asked, sitting beside Eleanor. "I've stayed longer than I planned," Eleanor admitted. "But it's time." "Not before you talk to Aunt Margaret again," Lily said. "She's been avoiding you all night. But you deserve more than that." Eleanor shook her head. "I said what I needed to. She's not ready to hear it." "Maybe not," Lily said. "But you're here, and that's something. Don't let her make you feel small." Eleanor smiled, touched by Lily's fierce loyalty. "You're a good kid, Lily." "Thank you." Lily grinned. "I'm not a kid anymore, but I'll take it." They laughed, the sound a small rebellion against the tension of the evening. But the moment was fleeting. Margaret approached, her face a mask of composure, though her eyes betrayed her unease. "Lily, could you give us a moment?" she asked. Lily hesitated, then squeezed Eleanor's hand and left. The sisters stood alone, the night wrapping around them like a heavy cloak. "Why did you really come?" Margaret asked, her voice low. "To make me feel guilty. To ruin Clara's day." Eleanor met her gaze. "I came for me. To stop feeling like I don't exist in your world." Margaret's lips parted, but no words came. For the first time, Eleanor saw a flicker of vulnerability in her sister's eyes. "You chose to leave," Margaret said finally. "You stopped calling, stopped visiting." "Because you made it clear I wasn't wanted," Eleanor replied, her voice steady but laced with pain. "You built this perfect life and left no room for me. But I'm still your sister, Margaret. I'm still here." Margaret looked away, her hands clasped tightly. "You don't understand what it's been like. Raising Clara, keeping everything together. You were always so independent. I thought you didn't need us." Eleanor's heart twisted. "I needed my family. I needed you." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with years of unspoken hurt. Margaret's shoulders sagged, and for a moment, she looked older, softer, like the sister Eleanor remembered. "I didn't know how to fix it," Margaret admitted. "After Mom died, after the house, it all got so messy." We both made mistakes, Eleanor said. But we don't have to keep making them. Margaret didn't respond. But she didn't walk away either. They stood there, two women bound by blood and broken by time, searching for a way back to each other. The music had stopped, and the garden was quiet, save for the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Finally, Margaret spoke. Clara doesn't know about you and Daniel. I never told her. Eleanor nodded, unsurprised. It's in the past. She doesn't need to know. But I do, Margaret said, her voice barely a whisper. I knew he was yours first. When he came into Clara's life. I didn't stop it. I should have. The confession hung between them, raw and heavy. Eleanor felt a rush of emotions, anger, sadness, but also relief. Margaret wasn't apologizing. Not yet. But she was acknowledging the truth. It was a start. I don't hate you, Eleanor said softly. I just want to be part of this family again. Margaret's eyes glistened, but she held herself together. I don't know how to do that, she admitted. But maybe we can try. It wasn't a promise, but it was enough. Eleanor nodded, her heart lighter than it had been in years. I'd like that. Margaret gave a small, hesitant nod, then turned to rejoin the guests. Eleanor watched her go, feeling the weight of the night settle into something new hope, fragile but real. As she gathered her things to leave, Clara appeared, breathless and smiling. You're not going without saying goodbye, are you? She asked. Eleanor smiled, warmth spreading through her. Never. They hugged again, longer this time, and Eleanor felt the years melt away. She wasn't just Clara's, and she was family, and that was worth everything. The bus ride home was quieter, the world outside cloaked in the soft gray of dawn. Eleanor leaned against the window, her suitcase at her feet, the emerald dress carefully packed away. Her heart was full, not with triumph, but with a quiet peace she hadn't known in years. The wedding had been a battle, but also a bridge one she'd crossed to find a piece of herself she'd thought lost. She thought of Clara's hug, the warmth of it lingering like a promise. She thought of Margaret's confession, fragile but honest. And she thought of Daniel, a man who belonged to her past, not her future. The pain was still there, but it was softer now, less like a wound and more like a scary reminder of what she'd survived. Back in her apartment, Eleanor unpacked slowly, each item a piece of the journey she'd taken. The invitation sat on her table, no longer a symbol of exclusion, but a marker of her courage. She'd gone to the wedding uninvited, unwanted, and yet she'd left with something precious, a chance to rebuild. Over the next few days, she settled back into her routine, but it felt different. The solitude was less heavy, the silence less oppressive. She tended her small balcony garden, her roses blooming despite the autumn chill. She read her books, sewed a new quilt, and wrote in her notebook not just fragments now, but stories, memories, dreams. A week later, a letter arrived, not an invitation this time, but a handwritten note from Clara. Dear Aunt Eleanor, it began. I'm so glad you came to the wedding. I want to know you better. Can we meet for coffee soon? The words brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. She wrote back immediately, suggesting a cafe near her apartment, her hand steady as she penned the words. Margaret called a few days later, her voice hesitant but warm. Clara told me about the coffee. She said, I'd like to come too, if that's okay. Eleanor's heart skipped. It's more than okay. The coffee meeting was small, just the three of them, but it felt like a beginning. They talked about simple things: Clara's honeymoon plans, Eleanor's roses, Margaret's garden. There were awkward moments, Pauses where the past loomed large. But they navigated them together. Eleanor saw glimpses of the sister she'd loved, the niece she'd longed to know. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. As the weeks turned to months, Eleanor found herself woven back into the fabric of her family. Not seamlessly, there were still tensions. Old wounds that ached on rainy days, but with care and time, they were healing. She visited Clara's new home, shared stories with Margaret over tea, and even laughed with Lily at a family dinner. Daniel was there too, a quiet presence. But Eleanor no longer flinched at his name. He was Clara's now, and that was enough. One evening, Eleanor sat at her kitchen table, the photograph of her and Margaret in its tarnished frame. She traced their young faces, their smiles frozen in time. "We made it," she whispered, not to the photograph, but to herself. She'd spent so long feeling excluded, forgotten, but she'd fought her way back, not with anger, but with love, resilience, and the quiet strength of a woman who refused to be erased. The rain tapped against her window again, but this time, it felt like a song. Eleanor smiled, her heart full. She wasn't alone anymore. She was home.